Question number 4, David Seymour.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Economic Development and reads as follows.
Order. I'm going to ask the member. There's just too much noise from my left-hand side. I'll ask the member to start his question again.
To the Minister for Economic Development, what are the fiscal risks to the Crown from Tracey Martin's New Zealand International Convention Centre Act 2013 Repeal Bill, if any?
The Honourable...
Mr. Speaker, if the bill was to pass...
Order. I'm about to lose my patience with one member in particular. Order. There's just been perpetual interjection from one member, particularly in a very loud voice. If it happens again, I'll be asking that member to leave the chamber. Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, if the bill was to pass and the New Zealand International Convention Centre Act repealed, the risks would be high. In terms of direct Crown liability, to begin with, the government would be liable for half of the design costs, up to a maximum of $10 million. But following the signing of a building works contract, that liability would rise potentially to the value of the concessions, which will be in excess of $400 million, as set out in Clause 22 of the agreement. But also important is the reputational risk. For governments to be able to contract, other parties to that contract need to be able to trust that the government will follow through. Subsequent cancellation of a contract of this magnitude would mean that other parties would be less likely to contract with government in the future or price in that risk. I am pleased, therefore, that that member and others on this side of the House will not be supporting the Repeal Bill.
Supplementary question, Tracey Martin.
Can the Minister confirm that Mr Seymour was in support of my bill until 1, he saw the polling in Northland, and 2, he received a phone call from himself?
There's no responsibility, ministerial responsibility for the bill. If the member wishes to ask a question that relates to the ministerial responsibility, I'll accept it. But the way it's phrased at the moment, it will be ruled out of order.
Supplementary?
Supplementary question. Tracey Martin.
Point of order, Mr Speaker. Can I rephrase the question to meet the...
I've given the opportunity for the member to rephrase it.
Thank you very much. Can the Minister confirm that Mr Seymour was in support of my bill until he received a phone call from the Minister himself?
Order. That question's not in order. Question number 5.
Mr Speaker, in the Minister's answer, he introduced the bill and that the ACT Party member was supporting it. It's perfectly reasonable for follow-up supplementary to address the answer that the Minister gave.
I'll listen again to the question. The way it was phrased, in my mind, I've made absolutely the correct decision. There must be a ministerial responsibility. If the member can relate it to a ministerial responsibility, then I'll accept the question. I'm trying to assist the member.
Thank you,
Tracey Martin.
Can the Minister confirm...
Order. Start again.
Can the Minister confirm if he has seen any reports indicating Mr Seymour's support of the bill until he received a call from the Minister himself pressuring him to change his position?
Mr Speaker, there's absolutely no ministerial responsibility in that question whatsoever.
Order. I listened to the question. It's a very easy question for the Minister to address. The Minister was asked whether he had seen any reports. Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, yes, I have seen reports. I'm not sure that I could verify those reports exactly. They were from a media outlet, but I have seen the reports.
Order. Supplementary question, Tracey Martin.
Thank you. Can the Minister explain why he and the questioner are now asserting the sanctity of contract law around my bill in light of the fact that Sky City has already indicated that it is in breach of a core platform of this particular contract?
That's right. Honourable Stephen Joyce. If the Minister didn't hear the question, I can get it.
Mr Speaker, I'm not sure that member's correct. What I can tell her, though, that in relation to her bill, and she does say at the outset of her bill, I understand, through the press release, that she's very keen to minimise costs to taxpayers. I agree with her. That's important, but the simple reality is that the bill that she's proposing would actually dramatically increase costs to taxpayers.
Question?
Supplementary question, Tracey Martin.
Can the Minister confirm that it was he who negotiated this contract that included clause 22, and whether it will cost the New Zealand taxpayer more or less than they have paid for the Nova Pay contract debacle he was supposed to be fixing?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, no, I did not personally negotiate the contract with Sky City. I did sign the contract on behalf of the government, and I can confirm that the Sky City contract, as constructed, says quite clearly that the concessions are in response to the construction of the International Convention Centre, and as such it would be considerably cheaper than the Nova Pay contract signed by the previous Labor government.
Supplementary question, David Seymour.
What can we learn about the role of government in commercial enterprises, and has the Minister seen any reports of other parties proposing such enterprises in their manifestos recently?
Order. I think the first part of the question can be answered. Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, I think government should always be careful in involvement with commercial enterprises and seek to transferring the risk to, for example, the private sector, as has been done, for example, in the ultra-fast broadband contract, which has been supported by this government, which has transferred the risk to the private sector and resulted in a very competitive development of ultra-fast broadband in this country as compared to, for example, Australia, where the taxpayer took on the commercial risk and has cost masses and masses of billions of dollars.
Question number 5, Paul Foster-Bell.
Tēnā koe, Mr